Chapter 4. Cities and Sights. England has 50 cities and many smaller towns, and there are lots of things to see and do there. The biggest city, and England's capital, is London. Nearly 8 million people live in London, more than in any other European city. The country's government is there, and for people in many different jobs, London is the most important place to be for work. For visitors too, London has many of England's most interesting sights and is one of the most important places to visit. London has many areas which are often very different, even if they are very close. Whitehall and Westminster are the areas where you can see some of London's most famous sights. Here, next to the River Thames, are Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament. At one time, England's kings and queens lived in these buildings, and they were called the Palace of Westminster. But today, Parliament meets here. Near the Houses of Parliament is Downing Street, where the UK's Prime Minister, the leader, lives, and where the government meets. Also near here is Westminster Abbey, a large and very important church where England's kings and queens have had their coronations since the time of William the Conqueror. Following the Thames to the north, and then towards the east from Whitehall and Westminster, you come to the West End. Here you can find theatres, restaurants, cinemas and clubs. Covent Garden, where there was once a big market, is now a great place to go shopping or to have a coffee and watch the street entertainers, actors, musicians, dancers, and others who do small shows outside. Further east is a small area called the City of London, which was the most important part of London in the Middle Ages. It is now one of the great financial centres of the world, a place where money comes in and out, and where England's big banks work from. Also here is St. Paul's Cathedral, which was built by the great architect Sir Christopher Wren, and the Tower of London, a castle from the 11th century. London is also famous for its large and beautiful parks. Just minutes from the West End, people can walk, exercise and relax in the large green areas of Hyde Park, Green Park and St. James's Park. Many people visit London for its museums and art galleries, and most of these are free. The Tate Modern is the world's largest modern art gallery, and at the British Museum there are several kilometres of rooms with more than 70,000 things to see. Many visitors to London like to take a ride on the London Eye, the largest Ferris wheel in Europe. From the top of the Eye, at 135 metres, you can see many of London's most famous buildings. Not far from London, you can visit 3 interesting and important royal places: Windsor Castle, which continues to be used by the royal family today, Hampton Court Palace, and Kew Gardens. It is less than 100 kilometres from London to Oxford, one of England's most beautiful cities, and home to its oldest university. Here you can walk around the fantastic old buildings of colleges like Christ Church and Magdalen, many of them more than 500 years old. Oxford also has England's oldest museum, the Ashmolean, as well as parks, gardens, and lovely river walks. Oxford is near a famous area of England called the Cotswolds. Close to the green hills there are beautiful villages with pretty houses made from gold-coloured stone and fine old churches. Many visitors come to this area, and there are tourist shops and afternoon tea rooms in a lot of the bigger villages. Oxford is not very far from Stratford-upon-Avon, famous as the hometown of William Shakespeare, the great writer. In this pretty river town, you can visit Shakespeare's old house, and also see a play at the theatre of the Royal Shakespeare Company. At Warwick, just a few kilometres away, is one of the greatest medieval castles in England. With its great towers and walls, dark dungeons and beautiful gardens, Warwick Castle is one of the most impressive in England. The University of Cambridge is almost as old as Oxford's, and the two cities are like each other in many ways. Like Oxford, Cambridge is a city of old colleges, many from the late 13th and early 14th centuries. With its gardens, green spaces and river, Cambridge is a lovely city to walk around. Two of the most famous places in Cambridge are King's College, with its beautiful chapel, a small church, and the Backs, an area of green land around the River Cam, from where you can see many of the colleges. Moving north, England's second biggest city is Birmingham, which was an important centre during the Industrial Revolution. Today, Birmingham is a very multicultural city and is home to the National Exhibition Centre, NEC, where many big shows and events are held. Many people come to Birmingham to visit its big, modern shopping centre, the Bullring, but few tourists spend a lot of time here. Further north of Birmingham, Stoke-on-Trent has been famous since the 17th century for its pottery industry. The industry of making objects such as cups, plates and bowls. Here you can visit the pottery factories and buy pottery cheaply from the factory shops. York is one of the most interesting cities of the north of England. It was a Roman city, and for many years it was an important place for religion and politics in England. During medieval times, the Middle Ages, there was a strong wool trade in York, and because of this, many other traders came to live here. The city feels very medieval even today, with its narrow streets and old walls. Many tourists come to visit the city and to see York Minster, the city's old cathedral, a large and important church with its beautiful windows. York was an important city when the railways were first built in England, and now it is home to the National Railway Museum. 25 kilometres from York is Castle Howard, one of the best of England's stately homes, big country houses. Stately homes were built for the most important families of England, who normally had homes in London too. These homes were places where the king or queen could visit and where important people could have meetings about politics or government. Two very exciting cities in the north of England are Liverpool and Manchester. Liverpool, which is on the sea, became important in the 18th century because of trade with America. Many immigrants from the West Indies, China and Ireland arrived in Liverpool when they came to England, so Liverpool was one of England's first multicultural cities. But by the 1970s and 1980s, ships were no longer coming to Liverpool. The city's old buildings stayed empty, and it became very poor. Since 2004, a lot of money has been spent in Liverpool, and Albert Dock, where ships used to arrive, is now an exciting new area with restaurants, museums, shops and art galleries. Liverpool was home to the Beatles, and many people come here to do Beatles tours, and to visit the clubs where the famous band played, or see the homes where John, Paul, George and Ringo lived. In Liverpool, you can also see some wonderful art at the Walker Art Gallery or Tate Liverpool, visit the two cathedrals, or take a boat across the River Mersey and look back at the famous sights of this great city. Just 50 kilometres east of Liverpool is another big city, Manchester. Manchester has some of the most exciting modern buildings in England. Its cafes, clubs and nightlife make it one of the best cities in the country for many young people. But like Liverpool, Manchester had a difficult time in the second half of the 20th century. Once the most important city in the world for cotton, Manchester's old industries were coming to an end by the 1950s, and many people lost their jobs. But new industries began to grow, and at the start of the 21st century, parts of the city were rebuilt, making Manchester an exciting city once more. Blackpool is very different from Liverpool and Manchester. With its long beaches, hotels and piers, Blackpool is a popular holiday town. Here you can eat fish and chips, go to amusement arcades, and see the coloured lights on Blackpool Tower. Some of the most interesting sights of England are in the far north of the country. Durham Cathedral, almost 900 years old, is here, and also the Angel of the North, the biggest sculpture in England. The sculpture of an angel with very wide wings was built on an old coal mine by Anthony Gormley, the same artist who made Another Place. He wanted people to remember that for 200 years mining was one of the biggest industries in this area. People pass the Angel of the North as they drive to Newcastle upon Tyne. Like Manchester and Liverpool, Newcastle is another industrial city that now has museums, art galleries, and an exciting nightlife. Near Newcastle is the end of Hadrian's Wall, parts of which can be seen very clearly. Today, the border with Scotland is further north than it was when the Romans built Hadrian's Wall. Just a few kilometres from today's border is another interesting site, Holy Island, or Lindisfarne. You cannot get to the island at high tide when the sea comes in closest to the land, but at other times you can walk or drive across to it and see the castle that was built here in the 16th century. Back in the south of England and west of London, there are more sights and interesting cities to see. Bath, so called because of its famous Roman baths, is a lovely little city. The old Roman baths are some of the best kept in Europe, and in the 18th century, many rich and important people came here to take the waters. Big, fine houses were built for them, and so Bath has many Georgian streets and buildings, with pretty parks too. Just a few kilometres further west from Bath, but very different, is the big, busy city of Bristol. Bristol, once a very big port, now has a strong electronics industry and is important in the creative media, film, TV, radio and fashion. It is also the biggest cultural centre in the area, with a busy nightlife. As in many other cities in England, the old docks, the area where the ships used to come in, have now been changed into an area for restaurants, shops and museums. One of the most famous sights of Bristol is the Clifton Suspension Bridge, which was made by the great engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Many visitors to Bristol make the short journey south to Glastonbury. Here you can visit Glastonbury Abbey, which was built in the 7th century. Glastonbury is also famous for the music festival held there most years in June. It is the biggest music festival in the country. Stonehenge, east of Glastonbury, is one of the wonders of the world. The big stone circles here were made between 3000 BC and 1600 BC. They are as old as Egypt's pyramids. One of the most interesting things about Stonehenge is that some of the stones are very heavy, up to 40 tons, but they came from hundreds of kilometres away in Wales. People believe they were probably brought and pulled to Stonehenge in simple boats, but no one is sure how they got to Stonehenge. On the longest day of the year, the sun rises across the stone circles. Because of this, many people think the circles were perhaps some kind of ancient calendar. In the county of Cornwall, in the far southwest of England, you can visit the Eden Project. Here you can see plants and trees from many different places, and the largest non-wild rainforest in the world. Brighton, on the south coast, became an important town in the mid-18th century, when people began to enjoy swimming in the sea. The Prince of Wales, later King George IV, started to come to Brighton in the 1780s, and in 1815 the Royal Pavilion was built for him. The Royal Pavilion, which has a strange mixture of Indian and Chinese building styles, is one of the most interesting buildings in Brighton today. Like Bath, Brighton has some beautiful Georgian buildings, but it is a fun town too. Here you can walk on the pier beside the sea, or through the lanes, narrow streets that were once part of the old fishing village of Brighton, and which are now busy with shops and restaurants. Northeast of Brighton, on the road to Dover, Canterbury is a place full of history. It was an important Roman town, and in AD 602, the first cathedral in England was built here. The cathedral was rebuilt in 1070 and continues to be very important today. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the head of the Church of England. As you can see, there are lots of exciting places to visit in England.